I propose that we spend some time looking back after it's been 1 year since B'Tselem published that report accusing Israel of practicing apartheid or committing the crimes of apartheid. And I think it's worth looking back on the past year and asking ourselves, how have the unfolding events on the ground in Israel and Palestine, what have they shown us? Have they confirmed those accusations, or have they refuted them? And of course, it's not just B'Tselem, but Yesh Din, already even before B'Tselem, I think it was September 2020, published a report accusing Israel of committing apartheid. And then the B'Tselem report came out in January 2021. And then the Human Rights Watch report, of course, came out after that in mid-2021. One of the world's most respected human rights organizations, Amnesty International, published a report, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet because it literally just dropped a few hours ago. But it published a report accusing Israel of committing apartheid. And so I think it is worth looking back and asking ourselves, what has the past year taught us? And so let's just first review the definition of apartheid here so that we're all on the same page and not debating semantics. Apartheid is the systematic domination of one group over another. It's a systematic oppression of that other group, of that other racial group, including inhumane acts as part of that oppression. And now, actually, I am going to quote from that Amnesty International report that just dropped this morning. Israel has sought to quote, maintain Jewish demographic hegemony and maximize its control over land to benefit Jewish Israelis while minimizing the number of Palestinians and restricting their rights and obstructing their ability to challenge that dispossession. And I think the key here that is really understanding that this is a systems level problem. This isn't a problem with the siege on Gaza, or a problem with the occupation of the West Bank, or a problem with the annexation of East Jerusalem, or a problem with the discrimination and apartheid inside Israel. It's an entire system level issue. And so I think it's worth actually just breaking down each of these systems. So let's start with, I think, the most obvious of those systems, which is what's happening in Gaza. I think this is the easiest for us to understand, so let's move through Gaza very quickly. So in May 2021, Israel killed 256 Palestinians. Israel demolished something like 900 homes, $400 million worth of damage, thousands of Palestinians permanently disabled and injured. The consensus among the international community is that these are war crimes because they are crimes committed indiscriminately against civilian populations. It's not just obviously in May 2021 during the war where Israel committed these egregious acts, but it's continuing, of course. According to the report that Amir Hass published a few weeks ago, Israel has been holding up vital spare parts for Gaza's water and sewage system. And of course, 90% of Gaza's inhabitants lack access to safe drinking water. And owing to the destruction and devastation caused after that assault on Gaza in May, Gaza's water and sewage systems were destroyed, and now Israel is preventing those spare parts from being imported. And I don't understand how you can possibly claim that spare parts for water and sewage systems are somehow part of Israel's security needs. Water is just the most basic human right. So it would be sort of like saying like Israel is in Israel's security needs to prevent air from getting into Gaza. It's almost that absurd. Of course, in the West Bank, the situation is not all that much better. In May 2021, Israel killed 20 Palestinians. They displaced, and just in the past year, over 1,000 Palestinians, both in May and beyond. And of course, I think anyone paying attention to the events of the past few weeks about the settler violence being committed in the West Bank, sanctioned by the Israeli army, can obviously understand what the nature of the relationship is between Palestinians inside the West Bank and Jews inside the West Bank. Two groups, both living side by side. So in some cases, they're literally neighbors living one house across from the other, subject to different legal systems. The Palestinians, of course, in the West Bank being subject to Israeli military law, Israelis subject to civilian courts, hence the apartheid accusations. In fact, things have gotten so bad, by the way, that just in the past few weeks, there was a letter, an open letter published by ADL. This is the Apartheid Defense League. Sorry, no, that's wrong. No. Basically saying to Israel and Naftali Bennett, hey, guys, you need to clamp down on this settler violence. This is making Israel look bad. And I think when we get to the point where the pro-Israel lobby is itself lobbying Israel to clamp down on settler Jewish violence, then things are getting pretty bad in the West Bank. And just, I know I've been rambling for a bit, but just to round out the story here with Israel proper, because I think it's sort of easy to understand how what Israel is doing in the West Bank and what Israel is doing in Gaza amounts to the crimes of apartheid. But I think it's a little bit harder for people to realize what's happening in how what's happening in Israel is also part of this system-wide oppression against a systematic attempt to dominate one group over the other. And I think we're seeing this right now in the Negev, in the Nakab, where over the past few weeks, the JNF, it was, I think, January 10th, the JNF went on a tree planting campaign in the Negev. What was the purpose of that tree planting campaign? It was to fulfill JNF's mission, which is, of course, to Judaize the land of Israel. I think people forget that JNF is part of the Israeli government. The Jewish National Fund is part of the Israeli government and its mission. And it owns, I think, something like 12% of the land of Israel. And its mission is on that 12%. And its mission is not only to acquire more land, but is to make sure that that land gets sold to Jews and only to Jews. Palestinians are forbidden from purchasing land owned by the JNF. I think a parallel in the United States would be if you took, say, the Bureau of Land Management in the U.S., if they had a law that said Native Americans are forbidden from buying land under the control of the Bureau of Land Management, I think that would be the parallel here, right? Because you have an indigenous group basically being told you're forbidden from buying land owned by the state. But anyways, they went on a tree planting campaign in the Negev. And the whole point of these tree planting campaigns, by the way, is to prevent Palestinians from using that land as agricultural land and grazing land. It's essentially push them off those lands and force them into the Bedouin settlements where Israel wants them to settle, such that they're in these tiny communities where they don't have access to land, where they're being deprived of their traditional means of subsistence. And what's happening in Jerusalem is part of the same story. It's pushing Palestinians out of their homes. The Sadheo family was just expelled from its home in East Jerusalem just last week. And so this is all part of the same campaign, which is happening in the West Bank, which is happening in Gaza, and it's also happening in Jerusalem and Israel, which is a part of this system level domination of Jews over Palestinians.